It started with a knock on the door and a smile that felt too perfect. She said she'd just moved in next door and needed a cup of sugar. I didn't think much of it then. I had no idea that moment would be the beginning of the end of my marriage. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet and warm. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, making coffee while my husband, Daniel, watched something on TV in the living room. The knock startled me. Sharp, hesitant, almost polite. When I opened the door, she was standing there with a small glass jar in her hand, and that kind of beauty that makes you look twice without wanting to admit it. Blonde hair tied loosely, big green eyes, and a little smirk like she already knew how charming she looked. "I'm so sorry," she said, a soft laugh behind her words. "I just moved in next door, and I was baking cookies, but I ran out of sugar." It was such a harmless request, so domestic it felt almost scripted. I smiled, handed her the sugar, and introduced myself. Her name was Maya. She thanked me, promised to return the favor, and for a moment, I thought she was sweet, harmless. Just another lonely girl settling into a new building. Daniel came over when she left. "New neighbor?" he asked, barely looking away from his phone. "Yeah," I said, "she seems nice." He nodded, uninterested, and went back to scrolling through something. I remember thinking how typical that was. Him being distracted, me trying to keep small moments alive between us. Back then, I still believed our marriage was fine, maybe a little dull, but steady. 2 days later, Maya knocked again. This time, she brought cookies. Chocolate chip, still warm. She said they were a thank you for the sugar, and before I could even finish inviting her in, she stepped across the threshold with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. She was talkative, asked questions about the neighborhood, about us, about Daniel's job. She laughed easily, leaned forward when she spoke, made eye contact the way people do when they want to be remembered. When Daniel came home early that evening, she was still there. They shook hands, and I caught the faintest flicker in her expression. The way her eyes measured him lingered half a second too long. I noticed it. I even laughed it off to myself. But it stayed in the back of my mind, quietly echoing like the tick of a clock in a quiet room. Over the next week, she became a small part of our daily rhythm. I'd see her in the hallway, hear her footsteps late at night, sometimes even catch her humming through the wall. Once, I dropped by her apartment to return her dish, and I noticed something. No furniture, just a few boxes and candles. The place felt temporary, like she wasn't planning to stay long. She told me she was between jobs, that she'd just gone through a breakup and wanted a fresh start. I felt sympathy. I offered her a drink, we sat together, and for a while, it felt good to talk to someone new. She listened well, smiled often, and somehow made me talk more than I usually did. Daniel began noticing her too. I'd catch him glancing at the window when she passed outside. Once, when she came by to borrow my blender, his voice softened in a way it hadn't with me in months. Just subtle shifts. The tone, the attention, the tiny sparks that people think others don't see. But I saw them. Still, I told myself not to overthink. Maya was just friendly. Daniel was just polite. That's how it starts. With little excuses we whisper to ourselves until they sound like truth. One evening, Maya invited us both over for dinner. I hesitated, but Daniel said yes before I could answer. She cooked pasta, poured wine, dimmed the lights, and played soft music that sounded like it belonged in a romantic movie. I remember how she laughed at everything Daniel said, how her hand brushed his once across the table, and how he didn't move away fast enough. I smiled through the evening, pretending not to notice, pretending my heart wasn't sinking with every glance they exchanged. After dinner, she stood by the door as we left and hugged me first. Warm, friendly, sincere. Then she hugged Daniel. It lasted a second too long. I told myself it was nothing. But I felt something. That quiet, electric tension that fills the air when boundaries start to blur. That night, when we went to bed, Daniel was restless. He turned to me, kissed me half-heartedly, and mumbled that he was tired. He fell asleep fast. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind looping that image of Maya's eyes when she looked at him, like she was already planning something. The days that followed were filled with small coincidences. I'd see Maya and Daniel talking in the parking lot when I came home early. She'd text me asking if Daniel could help her with something. A broken light bulb, a stuck window, a heavy box. I told myself she was being polite. I told myself Daniel wouldn't cross the line. One afternoon, I walked past her door and heard laughter inside. Two voices. One was hers. The other, low, familiar, was his. I froze, stood there listening. The sound of their laughter was like a knife slicing through the last bit of trust I had. But I still didn't open the door. Not yet. I stepped back, swallowed the hurt, and walked away. Because denial is easier than truth. That night, Daniel was distant again. I asked how his day was. He said fine. I asked if he saw Maya. He said no. I smiled, pretending to believe him, even though his shirt smelled faintly of her perfume. Sweet, floral, expensive. When I went to bed that night, I told myself tomorrow would be different, that it was all in my head, that my marriage was stronger than temptation. But deep down, I knew. I knew the moment she smiled at my door with that jar in her hand, she wasn't just after sugar. She wanted something sweeter, something that was mine. And I was too kind to stop her. There was a time when I believed Daniel and I were unbreakable. We had been married for 7 years, and while the spark had dimmed, the comfort was still there. The quiet routines, the inside jokes, the small gestures that made us feel safe. But comfort is a dangerous thing. It makes you stop looking closely. It makes you believe everything is fine, even when it isn't. I remember our mornings best. Daniel would wake first, make coffee, and read the news while I got ready for work. He'd hand me a cup with a half smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "Have a good day, love." Those moments felt ordinary then, but now they sting, like fragments of a life that belonged to someone else. After work, we'd eat dinner in silence, side by side, both too tired to talk. We'd watch a show, scroll through our phones, and fall asleep before midnight. We were living together, but not really with each other. Looking back, I can see how easy it must have been for Maya to slide between us. We had left a space open, one big enough for her to fit right in. It began subtly, as all affairs do. Daniel started working late, or so he said. His phone would buzz with messages he'd quickly dismiss. He was protective of his screen, turning it away when I was near. I told myself it was just work stress, that he deserved privacy. But deep down, I felt the shift. That cold, invisible wall that grows between two people when one of them has started to drift. Maya seemed to know exactly when to appear. The timing was uncanny. When Daniel was home alone, she'd show up with leftovers or a bottle of wine. When I was home, she'd send a casual text asking if we wanted to join her for drinks. She made herself part of our story, not as a threat, but as a friend. One Friday evening, she invited us both to her apartment again. I didn't want to go, but Daniel said, "She's just trying to be nice. You always think too much." That hurt. The tone, the way he said it, as if my intuition was a flaw. Still, I went. I smiled. I played along. Her apartment looked different this time. More furniture, candles lit, soft music playing. She had 2 glasses of wine poured before we even sat down. She wore something simple, a white blouse, jeans, but there was something deliberate about the way she carried herself, confident, comfortable, like she already knew her place in the room. The conversation flowed easily, too easily. Maya laughed at every word Daniel said. She looked at him the way I used to, with admiration and interest. I noticed how Daniel leaned in when she spoke, how his eyes lingered on her hands, how he laughed more than usual. At one point, I excused myself to the bathroom. When I came back, the lights were dimmer and their voices had dropped to whispers. I caught my name, just a murmur, before they noticed me. Maya smiled as if nothing happened, but Daniel looked uneasy. His face told me more than his words ever could. That night, I lay in bed beside him, wide awake. I wanted to ask him outright if something was happening, but I was afraid of the answer. So, I stayed quiet. Silence, I learned, is its own kind of cowardice. Days turned into weeks. Daniel was distracted, emotionally elsewhere. When I tried to reach him, he'd deflect with irritation or indifference. He stopped complimenting me. He stopped noticing when I dressed up or cooked his favorite meal. Instead, he was glued to his phone, smiling at something I couldn't see. Maya's presence grew louder. I'd find her perfume scent in the hallway, her voice echoing through the walls. Once, she left a sweater on our porch, claiming she dropped it by mistake. But it was his size, not hers. When I mentioned it, Daniel said, "You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word became his shield. Every question I asked, every doubt I voiced, bounced right off it. I started to doubt myself instead. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was jealous for no reason. Then came the night I realized just how far we had fallen apart. We were at dinner with friends, and someone asked if we were thinking of taking a vacation. Daniel shrugged and said, "I don't know, maybe I'll go somewhere sunny. I'll, not will." That one small word broke something inside me. I laughed it off, but inside I felt the distance stretch further. I was losing him, not suddenly, but slowly, piece by piece. A few days later, Maya texted me saying her kitchen light had gone out. She asked if Daniel could take a look since he's so handy. She added a smiley face at the end. I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to him. He sighed. "She's alone, babe. You'd want someone to help you if you were in her shoes." I didn't answer. I just handed him the flashlight. He left. When he came back an hour later, he smelled faintly of her perfume again, that same sweet floral scent that clung to his collar like a signature. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the soft glow from Maya's apartment across the way. The curtains were drawn, but I could see silhouettes moving, faint, blurry, intimate. I told myself it could be anything, but my chest tightened with every second that passed. The next morning, Daniel acted normal. He kissed my forehead, made coffee, and hummed softly like nothing was wrong. I almost envied his calmness, how easily he could live inside the lie. I went through the motions of the day, pretending that I didn't notice the way he checked his phone every few minutes, pretending that my stomach didn't twist when her name appeared on the screen. But the pretending couldn't last forever. Deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth slipped out, the way secrets always do. The first time I realized I was losing Daniel was the moment he stopped looking me in the eye. It was subtle at first. When I'd speak, his gaze would drift to the floor or the TV or his phone. It wasn't avoidance born of guilt, not yet. It was distance. Emotional distance. The kind that builds like fog between two people who used to see each other clearly. Then came the little lies. The delayed messages. The random errands that stretched longer than they should. The faint perfume that didn't belong to me. The lipstick stain that was too faint to argue over, but too obvious to ignore. All the small, undeniable details that whisper what your heart already knows, but your mind refuses to say out loud. I remember one Thursday night. I called him at 8. He didn't answer. He called back an hour later, said he was out with coworkers. His voice sounded cheerful, distracted. I could hear music in the background, and for a brief second, I thought I heard her laugh. That light, melodic laugh that used to echo through our hallway. When he got home, he smelled like whiskey and something floral. I asked him where he'd gone. He said a bar downtown. I asked who was there. He listed 3 names I didn't recognize and said he didn't remember the rest. He kissed my forehead, smiled faintly, and said, "You worry too much." That phrase became his escape hatch. Every time I asked a question, he'd use it like a shield. "You worry too much. You're overthinking." T asked, "Takeo, why can't you trust me?" And each time, I believed him just enough to stay quiet, because I wanted to believe that he was still the man I married. But one night, I couldn't sleep. The air in our bedroom felt heavy and the silence was unbearable. Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for water. Through the window, I saw a light flicker on in Maya's apartment. I stood there, staring across the small gap between our windows, and something in my chest tightened. The curtains were drawn halfway, and in the sliver of space between them, I saw movement. A shadow, tall, broad shoulders, his shape. My husband's shape. I froze, the glass in my hand trembling. The shadow moved closer to hers, and then they disappeared from sight. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I told myself it could be anyone. Maybe she had someone else visiting. Maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew. My body knew before my mind would accept it. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Every sound from next door made me flinch. Laughter, muffled footsteps, the clinking of glasses. It felt like the walls themselves were mocking me. The next morning, Daniel acted normal again. He made coffee, hummed a song, asked about my plans for the day. I tried to answer, but my voice came out small, detached. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and didn't care. I started keeping track of things. The times he left, the excuses he gave, the nights he said he'd be late. I wrote it all down in a small notebook hidden in my drawer. Each lie had its own line, each suspicion a date and time. It was my way of keeping control, of turning chaos into evidence. One afternoon, Maya caught me in the hallway. She smiled brightly, as if nothing was wrong, and said, "I haven't seen Daniel much lately. We're keeping him busy?" It was a perfect lie, delivered with effortless grace. Her tone was curious, innocent, but her eyes, they were daring me to react. I wanted to slap that smirk off her face. Instead, I smiled and said, "Yeah, he's been working late." We stood there for a few seconds, 2 women playing a quiet, cruel game where only one of us knew the rules. Later that evening, Daniel got a message while we were watching TV. He grabbed his phone quickly, turned it away, and typed something fast before putting it face down on the table. My pulse quickened. I leaned forward, pretending to stretch, and caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. It was saved under Mark T. We didn't know anyone named Mark T. The next day, when he left for work, I picked up his phone from the counter. My hands were shaking. The passcode had changed. That's when I stopped pretending. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way he shaved more often, the new cologne he wore, the gym clothes that weren't his style. He even bought a new shirt. one I'd never seen before, and said it was a gift from a client. But I'd seen the tag in the trash. It was from a women's boutique, the same one Maya mentioned once in passing. That night, when he said he was working late again, I waited. I sat by the window, watching the building across from ours. The hours crawled by. Then, just after 11, I saw him. He wasn't heading toward the parking lot. He was walking toward her door. He knocked softly, looking over his shoulder once before she opened it. She wore a robe. They stood there for a moment, faces close, silhouettes blending in the dim light. Then the door closed. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later. Right then, I felt something else. Something colder, sharper, heavier. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. When Daniel came home that night, I pretended to be asleep. He crept into bed quietly, his breathing calm, almost relieved. I wanted to turn to him, to scream, to demand answers. But instead, I lay still, eyes open, staring into the dark. Because I realized something, he wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of being caught. That's when I made my decision. If he thought he could play me for a fool, if she thought she could walk into my home and take what was mine, then they were both about to learn how wrong they were. I didn't want revenge out of rage. I wanted it out of justice. Cold, deliberate justice. The kind that doesn't shout, it whispers. I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows in the bedroom felt heavier than usual, pressing down on me like the truth was waiting to crush me. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant hum of traffic outside, made my heart race. I had seen him that evening, walking into her apartment, and now the weight of certainty made the air thick and hard to breathe. I went to the kitchen, trying to calm myself, my hands trembling as I poured water into a glass. The soft glow from the hallway light revealed the outline of my notebook, the one where I'd been meticulously tracking his lies and absences. I flipped it open, line after line, date after date, excuse after excuse, every detail like a breadcrumb trail leading me closer to the truth. Then I heard it. Laughter. Faint, low, melodic, familiar. Not from the TV, not from the street, but from next door. My chest tightened, stomach twisting in ways I didn't think possible. The sound of them together. Her light laugh, his deeper chuckle. It was intimate, casual, horrifyingly normal. I pressed my ear to the wall, holding my breath, willing them to speak, to say anything that would confirm what I already knew. A knock on the wall from her apartment, gentle, playful. His voice responding. Names whispered. I didn't hear her say mine. I staggered back from the wall, gripping the countertop for support. My mind raced. Every scenario I'd feared was suddenly real. The betrayal was no longer a shadow lurking in corners. It had a shape, a smell, a sound. I didn't confront them immediately. That would have been too emotional, too reckless. Instead, I waited. I watched. I collected evidence in my head, in my notebook, in the quiet observation that only someone fully aware of deceit could manage. The next day, I found a message. He had left his phone on the kitchen counter while charging. I told myself I wouldn't look, but my fingers betrayed me. A single text notification blinked. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you already. From Maya. I stared at it, disbelief and anger washing over me in waves. I replayed every recent moment, the way he smiled when she laughed, the way he lingered near her door, the excuses that made no sense. The pattern was unmistakable. I didn't cry. Not yet. My face was tight, controlled, as if keeping it together was my only weapon. Anger replaced the ache, sharp and precise. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about reclaiming control, about making them understand that they had miscalculated. Later, I decided to check Maya's apartment while he was at work. I told myself it was about confirming the truth, not out of malice, but to prepare for the next step. I approached the door slowly, feeling every step echo in the hallway. The handle was warm under my touch, the faint scent of perfume lingering. Inside, I didn't need much to know the truth. Wine glasses, 2 toothbrushes, a scarf of his, small items that weren't hers alone. I backed out quietly, breathing shallow, heart hammering. The evidence was irrefutable. I didn't need to see them together again. I didn't need to hear them whisper. I knew everything I needed to know. That night, when Daniel came home, I was waiting. Calm, collected, poised. He didn't notice at first. I greeted him with a smile, poured him a drink, and made small talk like nothing had happened. But beneath my calm, a storm brewed. Deliberate, controlled, precise. I wasn't going to explode in anger. I was going to make him realize that every step he took, every lie, had consequences. Later, as he leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling his phone, I said softly, "We need to talk about Maya." He froze. Eyes darted up, searching mine for signs of rage, of weakness. I let a faint smile play at my lips, slow, deliberate. "I know everything," I said. "Everything you thought I didn't see, everything you tried to hide." For the first time in months, I saw panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He swallowed, glanced toward the bedroom door as if considering running, then looked back. "You're overreacting," he muttered, voice tight. But I could see the truth, the fear, flickering behind the lie. I leaned closer, my voice low and controlled. "Do you really think I didn't notice? The laughter through the wall, the perfume, the late nights, the lies about work. Do you think I didn't see your messages? Did you think I was blind?" He hesitated. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. Denial, rationalization, panic. I waited, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to feel the weight of every step he had taken. And then, I said what I had been rehearsing in my mind for days. "I have proof. Everything you tried to hide. And I know her. I know you both. And neither of you are going to forget this." His lips parted, words stuck, sweat forming at his temples. For the first time, Daniel looked small, exposed, and utterly human. Not the man I had loved, not the partner I had trusted, but someone who had underestimated the quiet resolve of a woman scorned. That night, I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I just watched, calm and precise, as the consequences of their actions settled over them like a slow, unavoidable storm. Because now, I had the upper hand. And when it came time to act, I would be ready. There's something sacred about silence. The kind that comes after truth has been uncovered. It doesn't scream or explode. It waits. It watches. And it's in that silence that people make their biggest mistakes. Daniel thought my silence meant defeat. He didn't realize it meant calculation. The day after I confronted him, he tried to play the good husband. He brought me flowers, cheap ones from a gas station. He made coffee without asking how I like it and kissed my cheek like it could undo months of betrayal. It was all theater. I watched him perform like he was trying out for forgiveness, but I was already writing a different script. I didn't want to hurt him in the heat of the moment. I wanted the burn to be slow, controlled, surgical. So I smiled. I played my part. Because revenge is best served by someone who looks like they've already forgiven you. I started by gathering everything. Bank statements, phone records, screenshots of messages he thought were deleted. I even had a friend, a quiet, clever woman from my office, help me recover data from his old backups. He hadn't just betrayed me with Maya. There had been others. Names I didn't recognize. Messages that dated back almost 2 years. My marriage wasn't just cracked, it was hollowed out. But Maya, she was different. She wasn't a fling, she was a replacement, and that's what made her dangerous. So, I made a plan. I started with a message. Anonymous, clean, direct. Sent from a burner email. A single photo. Daniel and Maya, outside her door, her hand on his chest, his smile too casual. No words, just the image. I knew Maya's landlord, I knew her lease terms. And I knew she'd been late on rent more than once. She'd wanted my husband. She could have him, but not without the rest of the truth crashing down around her. Next, I went to Daniel's office. Not to confront him. No, that would be too easy. I asked to speak with his manager, calmly, politely. I brought documents, emails sent from his work account to hers. I told them I had concerns about inappropriate behavior. Workplace policy violations. I never used the word affair. I didn't have to. They connected the dots themselves. Later that week, Daniel came home angry. He slammed doors, paced the apartment, said things like overreaction and witch hunt. I just listened, sipped my tea, watched him unravel. And then I gave him the envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, neatly signed, clean, bound. I'd already contacted a lawyer weeks ago, back when the scent of Maya's perfume started clinging to his clothes. I'd waited for the right moment, and now it had come. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared at the paper like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. "You're serious?" he finally asked. I nodded. "You made your choices. I'm making mine." But I cut him off. "Don't insult me by pretending to be surprised." I gave him a deadline. 2 weeks to move out. I'd already spoken to the landlord. The lease was in my name. I'd be staying. He'd be starting over. As for Maya, I ran into her in the hallway the next day. Her smile was gone. She looked tired, cornered. She asked me if I'd told anyone. I smiled. I didn't need to, I said. The truth always finds its own way out. She didn't say anything after that, just turned and walked away. A week later, Daniel was gone. His things cleared out. His presence erased. I stood in the empty apartment, alone, breathing in the quiet. There was no apology, no redemption arc, just freedom, clean, sharp, and final. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd thrown away. And he would. Not all at once, but over time. In the silence of unfamiliar walls, in the absence of someone who once trusted him completely. People always think betrayal is the end of the story. But it isn't. It's the beginning of a different kind of power. The kind you only find when you've lost everything else. And that's what I had now. Power. Peace. And a perfectly empty home. It's quiet now. The kind of quiet I used to fear. At first, after he left, the silence was unbearable. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach across the bed, forgetting no one was there. I'd hear a noise from the hallway, and for a second, I'd expect his keys in the lock. Old habits are stubborn like that. They survive even after the person who created them is long gone. But then the silence changed. It stopped echoing with memories. It stopped asking me to explain what I did or didn't do. It just existed, and I learned to exist inside it. Sometimes I still think about the beginning, about that knock on the door, about Maya's voice, light and harmless, asking for sugar. I let her in so easily. I always wondered why. Maybe I wanted distraction. Maybe I wanted connection. Or maybe I never really believed someone could be that cruel, that calculated, while smiling so sweetly. The thing about betrayal is that it's rarely a single event. It's a slow unraveling. 1,000 tiny choices that accumulate until the thread holding everything together snaps. And when it does, it's never quiet. Even in silence, it roars. I watched Daniel fall apart from a distance after he left. Word got around. Maya's lease wasn't renewed. His office put him on a quiet leave of absence. I never reached out. I never gloated. That wasn't the point. I didn't want his pain. I wanted my freedom. And I earned it. Every time someone smiles and says, "You look happier lately," I nod and thank them. They don't need to know the full story. That's mine. That stays behind my smile. But I'll tell you this. I stopped trying to erase what happened. I let it live beside me, like a shadow. Not to haunt me, but to remind me of who I became. Because I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't just a victim. I was the woman who saw the truth, stood in the fire, and walked out clean. Some nights, I light a candle and sit near the window, looking out across the quiet street. I sip my tea, I breathe, and I remember. Not him, not her. Me. The version of me that didn't flinch. The version that didn't scream, or beg, or break. The version that planned, that waited, that ended it on her terms. People think revenge is dramatic, explosive, something out of a movie. But real revenge? It's silent. It's strategic. It's walking past the wreckage they made of your heart and knowing you don't have to carry any of it with you. And if I'm being honest, I hope Maya knocks on someone else's door one day with that same smile and that same request. And I hope the woman who answers doesn't give her sugar. I hope she gives her fire.